is Danielle Pletka on Meet the Press on MSNBC talking about this major climate report. 13 agencies in the U.S. government, the fourth one they've ever put out in the past 18 years. Last one was in 2014. Says that we are facing dire consequences. We need to act on it quickly and resolutely. And here's the American Enterprise Institute.
Problem again is that I think there's a perception among those for whom Donald Trump speaks, and let's admit that Donald Trump does actually speak for some people, that
I think 46% is a number that seems to be the number for people wondering.
And that's a pretty substantial bunch of people. The problem for many is that they perceive this as an agenda that is much more about corporate and much more about law and much more about the kind of governance that America has and much less about climate. So from the standpoint of those who have doubts about this, and I don't think we can have any doubts that there is climate change, whether it's anthropogenic, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I look at this as a citizen and I see it.
I don't understand this talking point. I'm not a scientist, which means that I don't have to listen to the vast majority of scientists who have weighed in on this.
Yeah, that's a very ineffective talking point, right? Like, if you're like, how do you undermine the claims of a field by saying you're not part of the field?
I have to.
Unless you're trying to say that scientists are like analogous to, I don't know, like palm readers. I
went to an eye doctor with Saul to get his eyes checked out. I told the guy, look, I am not an eye doctor, so I'm not going to believe what you say. And Saul just squints his way through the day. Now, continue.
So I understand it. On the other hand, we need to also recognize that we just had two of the coldest years, the biggest drop in global temperatures that we've had since the 1980s, the biggest in the last 100 years. We don't talk about that because it's not part of the agenda. The United States has been dropping in CO2 emissions since we pulled out of Paris. There are actually good things that are happening. We are not using dirty coal anymore. It's the Europeans who are using dirty coal. There actually is some corporate leadership on this. Yes, we need to deal with these problems. Yes, we need to mitigate the things we see, but we shouldn't be hysterical.
You know, this lady is such an unmitigated liar, fabulist. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to listen to the overwhelming number of scientists in the world telling us that this is man-made problem and there are man-made solutions. However, I will pull out one fun fact that we've had extreme cold over the past 2 years that nobody talks about.
Yeah, that anybody who's taken a science elective could dispatch.
And on top of that, I'm also not going to mention the fact that the only reason why our CAFE standards and we're putting out less CO2 is a function of California basically saying we're not going to go along with what the federal government is saying. And if I am not mistaken, the federal government is attempting to sue California into lowering their emission standards. And all of the car companies don't want to do it because they don't want to go back and forth because they realize that we're headed to a disaster. And they know that anybody coming in who's reasonably sane in the leadership of our government is going to require them to cut back. So they figure, why don't we just do the obvious responsible thing?
She happens to be the vice president for foreign and defense policy for AEI.
So they couldn't get anybody else in that morning. We need to send somebody. Well, I guess I'll do it. I'm not a scientist, but.
I mean, that's particularly funny because the Pentagon is pretty far out ahead on this as well.
I'm not a Pentagon official, but
I'm not a Pentagon official, but I think that they should make absolutely unnecessary oil runs, which put their troops in unnecessary harm's way when there's an alternative. Why, you ask? Well, because I'm not politically correct.
I don't fly a bomber, but I do think that we could drop a couple on Iran. I mean, come on. Unbelievable.
It's just funny, though, because it's like the reason we don't do anything is because of power.
Right.
Because of these industries.
This is just a projection of that.
Governance. And this is the best they've got. I mean, maybe like several years ago, it was like, hey, let's fund some scientists to do some like alternative graphs that look really impressive. And now we could just put some idiot out on TV. It's just like, it's science. What are you gonna do?
Well, the bottom line is they know that, look, we're just paying for this. Like we're paying for the lawmakers. We don't really have to spend too much time selling it to the public at this point.
That's why that woman who, when in the preamble to that clip, she's talking about the 46% or whatever people Trump represents that just need to be heard about their feelings about climate change, right? Like, which is a way to round up, because even Trump fans are like, there's more people who believe in climate change than like are anti-Trump, I think.
Right.
I think, it's like about 72%, I think, are people who say when they're polled that they accept that climate is changing because of human action.
Right.
Which is the simplest, bare minimum way it's polled.
So her taking Trump's highest approval ratings to say, like, all of these people also want to know,
like,
what's in it for me, this climate change.
This is also not dissimilar from Meg Whitman when she was is it Meg Whitman? She was the former EPA. Yep. I just recall some Saturday morning sitting next to her on one of those type of shows saying, well, part of the reason is that the liberal left is just so in your face about this that it forces the conservatives to say climate change is not real.